House Press Secretary Jean-Pierre hit the brakes on suggestions that the Biden administration could ignore a Texas federal judge's ruling against the FDA's approval of the abortion pill Mifepristone. Let's listen.
AOC suggests that the administration should just ignore the ruling, and she said that, quote, "We know that the executive branch has an enforcement discretion." Is that true?
So this is similar, I think, to what Terry was asking me. Look, we understand the frustration, right? We get the frustration regarding this decision, absolutely. And that's why we were quick to act. That's why you saw DOJ take action. Basically what I said to Terry, we stand by FDA's approval of Mifepristone, and we are prepared to have a long legal fight here. That is our commitment to women out there. That is our commitment to Americans across the country. But I'll say this, it is dangerous. But as a precedent, as a dangerous precedent is set for a court to set aside the FDA's expert judgment regarding a drug safety and efficacy, it would also set a dangerous precedent for this administration to disregard, right, a binding decision.
Biden's apparent unwillingness to consider ignoring the court ruling goes against what his own Secretary of Health and Human Services suggested. Let's take a look at this.
But are you taking it off the table that you will recommend the FDA ignore a ban?
Everything is on the table. The president said that way back when the Dobbs decision came out. Every option is on the table.
Now, Jean-Pierre's pushback comes after several top Democrats have urged Biden to ignore the Texas ruling, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who says the courts don't have legal authority over the FDA.
That I believe that the Biden administration should ignore this ruling. I think that the courts have the legitimacy and they rely on the legitimacy of their rulings. And what they are currently doing is engaged in an unprecedented and dramatic erosion of the legitimacy of the courts. It is the justices themselves, through the deeply partisan and unfounded nature of these rulings, that are undermining their own enforcement.
So what you're saying is technically true, that the court obviously doesn't have its own enforcement mechanism, and that the courts always have relied on the legitimacy of the state being behind them, and that is part of the checks and balances in this delicate dance where we have norms that are controlling much of how this country is run as opposed to other things. Now, I think the argument is that she is getting over her skis because at the end of the day, this is a pause on the FDA, vetting of this drug. It was appealable within 8 days. The Biden administration has appealed this. It's not clear. This hasn't run its course within regular legal means, so this does feel somewhat premature. It's worth focusing, also taking a moment to acknowledge what this drug actually does. But did you have something?
No, I agree with you. I think the Biden administration, is working to appeal this. I don't think this is a very good decision. I'm not at all persuaded that a higher court, even a right-leaning court, would agree with this decision. This is a drug that has been authorized for 23 years. Tackling abortion through this mechanism, through approval of a drug, again, it's been approved already for 23 years. This seems like a pretty tortured way to go about enacting policy through the judiciary. So I understand the frustration, but yes, let it play out seems like the right way to react here, instead of going full Andrew Jackson, the court has made their decision, but I will continue to butcher Native Americans if I feel like it.
Yeah, and look, if it gets to the point where this is successful, I respect the position of saying nothing's off the table. I think that's just good negotiating tactics. But kind of affirmatively putting forward your own desire to undermine the courts when the Republicans, frankly, in this context, or at least the ones involved here, are doing a good job of that of their own. So to your point, this is something that was approved 23 years ago through formal administrative processes with no issues, that has been used very safely. It's safer than Viagra, many people have been pointing out, although, of course, drugs like Viagra that appeal to the interest of men don't seem to come under the same scrutiny as reproductive drugs. It's a drug that is used not just for abortions, but for women who have suffered miscarriages, so that it comes between them and their ability to get medical care and to deal with the loss of their child and to process that and get it out of them without more draconian means. There is one other drug that does something similar that is an alternative that people can be using in the interim. But given the fact that this was a lawsuit that was brought by a conservative Christian organization, the Alliance Defending Freedom, a conservative legal advocacy group that has had as its mission undermining the right to access abortions generally speaking, that they forum-shopped and found a sympathetic conservative judge who has also advocated in his personal life for against abortion rights. This is the kind of strategy that is bearing fruit and which people have been using and which ultimately resulted in the Dobbs decision, right? So I don't think it's irrational for people to be concerned that this strategy works. And as a lot of people have been talking about in the context of the ProPublica story about Clarence Thomas taking hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps millions of dollars worth of gifts from this particular conservative billionaire donor.
I'm taking trips with this donor.
Yeah.
Who's a
Yeah, that's what I said.
Friend, yes.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of trips from this person that were not disclosed. That, Clarence Thomas as a person is someone who has in his jurisprudence written about the fact that he thinks that there's absolutely no problem with money in politics, that money is fully speech, that unless it's a literal bribe with an explicit quid pro quo, there's nothing coercive about the influence of money in politics. And his clerks, Clarence Thomas is the longest serving justice and has more clerks that have become federal judges themselves than anybody else in the court. So that's the kind of influence bubble that we're looking at here. So the idea that this could successfully run up through the federal courts and find more sympathetic judges is not impossible.
Well, sure, but I don't think Clarence Thomas's opinions are really, I just don't believe that they're affected by the trips he takes with this person. I mean, he's sincerely committed to his conservative worldview.
I think his choice to take the trips is indicative of his worldview, which is that there's no such thing as there's no such thing as negative influence of money in politics. I
don't think his worldview is a secret.
No, it's just being broadcasted and made obvious by his own personal behavior and his belief that there's no such thing as influence peddling. But my understanding is that most Americans have a very good grasp of corruption. They're very frustrated by high levels of government corruption. They had a significant appetite for figures like Bernie talking about how corrupt the government was, and for figures like Trump talking about how corrupt the government was and how he was going to clean the swamp. And establishment politicians saying, "Hey, I just took the money. It doesn't mean I have to do anything with it," is not a message that I have observed historically goes on very well with the American public. So I agree with you. I don't think that buying, paying, thousands of dollars for a giant bust for Clarence Thomas's Catholic school, or paying $500,000 for a yacht trip or these airplane private jet trips affects Clarence Thomas, that he needs that to have any certain kind of opinion. But I do think it's indicative of the impunity with which a lot of elites who went to Ivy League institutions like Clarence Thomas did, and who have lived a very elite life for a very long time, thumb their nose at the corruption that ordinary Americans experience every day to their detriment.
I just don't think it's effective. He's married to a Republican activist.
Yeah.
That is its own, that's probably the more likely way there's influence, and that is all sorts of problematic because of the things his wife has done and said, et cetera. I don't really believe that whatever his relationship with this person, maybe if it violates some ethics rule, fine, it violates some ethics rule. I think he is a pretty, he has his philosophy about how his conservative views, what his Supreme Court views are. I don't really think it's being influenced in this case,
I only brought it up to say that he has an incredible amount of influence, and that his justices, with all of his political views, who share his political outlook, broadly speaking, or his clerks rather, who share his political outlook, are numerous in the federal court system, and he and the Federalist Society Leo, who he was also pictured with on some of these trips, have done a really incredible job at seating the federal court system with people who are very much ideologically aligned. So while I completely agree with you that this is a complete miscarriage of justice and supplementing an administrative process with an activist right-wing judge who has apparently Googled this drug and decided that he knows better than the FDA in terms of health and safety issues, it is possible that this is the world we live in and that these kinds of decisions are affirmed at higher levels, including on the Supreme Court level. So we'll have to follow this one.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I have a feeling it won't be, but we will see. More Rising right after this.